One of the most common questions about the Jupiter-X and XM is how to use I-Arp for a fairly common task to create a split keyboard that allows an arpeggiated bass part on the lower section with independent play on the upper section like you hear here. It's popular on vintage multi-timbral synths and usually easy to set up, but not so straightforward on the new Jupiters. One of my first tutorial videos was on this subject, but it was a bit of a hack and the video is already outdated. New firmware has improved I-Arp in many ways, and now that more folks have the Jupiter-X, I thought it was time to create an updated tutorial. And on that note, even though I demonstrate this on the XM, the same procedures and menu selections apply to the Jupiter-X as well. Step 1 is to start with an INIT Scene and turn off parts 3, 4, and 5. To get familiar with this process, it's best not to start with a preset or use other parts because if something goes wrong, it's hard to track down the problem. So in part mode, Step 2 is to tap the split button. This automatically sets up the key ranges for the two tones of parts 1 and 2. By default, part 1 is the upper part, and part 2 is the lower part, and C4 is the split point. Step 3 is to select tones for the upper and lower parts. You'll note that the default tones aren't particularly suited for this type of split, so we'll select a string or pad tone for the upper section and a good bass tone for the lower. If we turn on I-Arp, we'll immediately hear some issues. Both parts are arpeggiating rather than just the lower part. So step 4 is to turn off the ARP for the upper part, and we do this in ARP Part Edit by changing Switch to Off. Next, let's check the lower part. It's supposed to be a 2-octave up motif, but we're not hearing the second half of it, just a gap. Since the split point is C4, we want to change the range and add another octave. Step 5 is to go to Scene Zone Edit for lower part 2 bass and change key range upper as needed. In this case, C5. Now we can hear the full range of the bass arpeggio. But if we play the upper keys, they steal steps from the lower ARP. We need to change I-Arp so that it only applies key presses to the lower part. Step 6 is to page back to ARP Common Edit and change its in range up setting, which currently applies to the whole keyboard. We'll change it down to C4. Now we have an arpeggiated bass line on the lower part that is independent of whatever we play on the upper part. At this point, you can customize the ARP for the lower bass part in the ARP Part Edit page. Things you might change here are settings like the octave range, the motif of the ARP, like up, down, random, and the shuffle setting. Finally, as I try to emphasize in all my tutorials, stop and save your scene. You don't want to mistakenly exit out and lose your work. And more than that, you can save this scene as a template for all your future splits like this. One final note, if you change the I-Arp type in Arp Common Edit, you'll likely have to check these settings for each part again. More often than not, for programming like this, you want to focus on the Arp part edit and motif for your arpeggiated bass line. I hope you found this useful, and I'm putting up the final slide with each of the steps outlined again. Keep in mind that this video was demonstrating the hiccups you might encounter, and the actual process is not as complicated as it might look. And if you found this helpful, please hit like and consider subscribing to my channel. There's always more to come. And check out my Jupiter Expert blog at the URL shown here for the latest news, demos, tips, and tutorials for the Jupiter X series of synths.